I think I speak for the entire MMA community when I say, what the actual hell did we all just wake up to? Like, what? Nick Diaz is back, Tony Ferguson is back, and they're on the same card, not against each other, but fighting two bad matchups where they're kind of guaranteed to lose? Like, does Dana White really think he's doing the fans a service with this matchmaking? Like, what? Like, no one is excited for this. It's happening Abu Dhabi, like, August 3rd. So, I mean, this card is looking pretty stacked, but also very fucking depressing. Like, Nick Diaz fighting Luque. Like, come on, man. I mean, the only thing that could possibly give me, like, the slightest confidence in Nick's chances against Luque is, you know, Vicente has not really been the same man ever since Jeff Neal, like, smashed his brains inside out and gave that guy a brain bleed, essentially. Like, ever since, Luque's not been as confident in terms of taking hits, and he gave up against Joaquin Buckley, which is completely out of character for a guy like Vicente Luque. Like, for a guy like Luque to quit on himself in a fight, like to pull guard and just shell up and not even try to move, that's uncharacteristic of a guy like Vicente. And, you know, Nick Diaz does have better hands than Vicente Luque, way better boxer than Luque. He could definitely piece Luque up, who's very hittable. I mean, that does give me confidence, but there's one problem. Nick Diaz is 40 years old. He's literally fought twice in the last 9 years. Since 2015, he's only fought twice. And with a 6-year time gap between the Anderson Silva fight and the Robbie Lawler fight, and then 3 years after the Robbie fight, he's back taking on Luque. Now, when he fought Robbie Lawler, he was fat, out of shape, had a defeated mindset going into that fight, like talking like, I already know I'm going to lose. Why am I taking this fight? I don't really want to fight. I'm just doing it because I have to. And, you know, we saw the fight. It ended pretty ugly for Nick. I mean, I do think this time Nick Diaz will have a better camp. I do think that Nick Diaz will show up in better shape this time. And I do think mentally Nick Diaz is going to be a lot better for this matchup than he was the Robbie Lawler fight. And the Lawler fight was at 185 last minute because I think Nick was injured, so he wasn't in shape to make the weight. I think we're going to see a healthier Nick Diaz who's more physically prepared and in better shape and coming to win. And he does have the skill set to beat a guy like Luque, but again, the problem with Nick Diaz is he's 40 and lack of activity. I think that's still going to be his downfall in this fight. Now, his hands early on against Lawler were looking pretty nice until Lawler started working the body, and that kind of took Nick Diaz's gas tank, and then Lawler took over from there. And, you know, Luque does have some pretty nasty body shots, good leg kicks as well. I do think that Vicente Luque is just going to break down Nick. Well, I don't know. Nick Diaz might have a tighter stomach, so his body may not be as much of a target as it was against Lawler, but I think Luque is going to win this fight, man. I just think Luque is the fresher fighter, the more active fighter. He may not be in his prime anymore, but he's 32. He's fought more recently than Nick Diaz has. Like, man, why couldn't Nick be this active when his USADA suspension was lifted in 2016? Because I don't want to hear shit about how, cut him some slack. He had a 5-year suspension. Dude, in August 2016, his suspension was literally lifted. He was literally eligible to fight, and he was offered fights. He turned fights down. He didn't have the hunger or drive or passion to fight. He wasted his prime. But now in 2021 to 2024, now all of a sudden he wants to come back and fight anyone, anywhere, whether it's a fight night or a pay-per-view. He'll just now fight anyone, anywhere. Where was this in 2016, 17, 18? Why is he choosing now to be active after wasting all the precious years of his prime? Like, get out of here, man. He's not going to win this fight. If he does win, I won't be surprised, but only because Vicente Luque is a shell of his former self. But even if Luque does have a hard time on the feet, Vicente Luque is a very excellent grappler. We're now lately seeing him mix in takedowns, and Nick Diaz has shown a weakness when it comes to takedown defense, and Luque was able to, beat RDA just through out-wrestling him. So it's possible Vicente Luque could probably win just through a lot of grappling and takedowns and control against Nick and beat him on the ground. But then even Nick Diaz off his back is pretty good. And this fight's 5 rounds as well. 5-round co-main event. Damn, 5 rounds of violence. But yeah, I don't like this fight for Nick Diaz. He should be fighting Tony because either way, the fans win. It doesn't matter. The fans win at the end of the day. If he's fighting Tony, yeah, one of them has to lose, but at least one of them can win. There's a possibility we could be seeing Tony get a W or Nick get a W. You know what I mean? But instead, we have to watch them lose to someone else. This reminds me of UFC 279 when Ferguson was supposed to share a card with a Diaz bro, Nate, when Nate was going to fight Chimaev, Tony was going to fight Lee. But luckily, last minute, the MMA gods spared us with Chimaev missing weight, and then they ended up just making Tony Ferguson fight Nate instead of fighting the Leech. And then Tony still lost, but Nate Diaz at least won. So there was some good to that. So I'm hoping we see a similar scenario where Michael Chiesa pulls out, Luque pulls out, and we get Tony Ferguson versus Nick Diaz. But sadly, I got a bad feeling that both these fights are going to go through. And then Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chiesa. Come on, man. Tony is going to get laid and preyed on again. Ever since Justin Gaethje beat the testosterone out of this man and took his manhood, Tony Ferguson has lost all ability to not only grapple, but grapple defensively. He can't stuff takedowns to save his life. When he gets taken down, this man cannot get back to his feet. He stays there when he gets taken down. So this is going to be a very straightforward walk in the park victory for Michael Chiesa. He's just going to take Tony Ferguson down. He's the bigger man. At this point in their careers, he's the better grappler than Tony Ferguson. Tony only has a chance on the feet, but we all know Michael Chiesa is not going to play that stand-up game with him. He likes to wet blanket his opponent, so he's going to take the path of least resistance. It's going to look just like the Carlos Condit fight, and I'm calling it right now. I think Michael Chiesa is going to win round 2 submission via Kimura. It's funny, these two were actually supposed to fight during Tony's prime in 2016, but Chiesa pulled out. Had they fought then, I think Tony Ferguson would have subbed Chiesa because Michael has a knack for getting subbed by strikers. And back then, Tony's jiu-jitsu was actually good, so he would have darce choked Chiesa. But today, in 2024, nah, man. I think Tony's in trouble in this matchup. It's going to be another sad day. And I pray that when Tony loses this fight, which is a given, that he retires or the UFC forces him to retire, because my heart can't take this anymore. But man, I'm not ready for August 3rd. Please, MMA gods, shuffle up the matchups, please. But let me know what you guys think in the comments.